You're sitting there, staring at your bank account. The number doesn't move the way you need it to. You work, you save what you can, and somehow, by the end of the month, you're back where you started. Maybe worse. Now imagine someone else. Same job, same salary, same salary, same city, but their account looks different. Not because they make more, but because they crossed a line you haven't yet. A line that doesn't announce itself, doesn't send you a notification, but once you're on the other side of it, everything changes. That line is $10,000, and the reason life gets easier after you hit it is almost nothing to do with discipline or budgeting or cutting out lattes. It has everything to do with a system that was designed, very specifically, to reward people who already have money and punish people who don't. This isn't about motivation. This is about math. Cold, structural, unbending math. The kind that doesn't care how hard you're trying. So let's talk about what actually happens when you cross that threshold, and why, if you're still on the wrong side of it, the game is rigged in ways you probably haven't noticed yet. Here's the first thing you need to understand. Money has gravity, not metaphorical gravity. Real, measurable, compounding gravity. The more of it you have, the more it pulls toward itself, and the less you have, the harder it is to hold on to. This isn't philosophy. This is how the financial system is structured. At every level, let's start with the most obvious one, banking fees. If your account balance drops below a certain amount, most banks charge you for the privilege of keeping your money there, usually somewhere between $10 and $15 a month. Doesn't sound like much, but if you're living paycheck to paycheck, that's $180 a year, just for being poor. You didn't spend that money. You didn't withdraw it. It was taken automatically because your balance wasn't high enough. Now, if you have $10,000 sitting in your account, that fee disappears. Not because the bank suddenly likes you more, but because you've crossed the threshold where they profit more from holding your money than from charging you to hold it. Same bank, same account, different math, but that's just the surface. Let's go one layer deeper. Overdraft fees. If you're living close to zero, one mistimed charge, one forgotten subscription, one unexpected expense, and you go negative, the bank doesn't just decline the transaction, they let it go through. And then they charge you $35 for the favor. You just paid $35 because you didn't have 12. And if you don't catch it fast enough, if more charges come through before you can deposit money, you get hit again and again. People have been charged hundreds of dollars in overdraft fees in a single week. Not because they were reckless, but because they were broke at the wrong time. Now, if you have $10,000 in your account, overdrafts basically don't exist. You're never close enough to zero for it to matter. The system that punishes people for being poor simply doesn't apply to you anymore. This is what people mean when they say it's expensive to be poor. It's not a metaphor. It's a fee structure. But let's keep going. Because banking fees are just the beginning, let's talk about credit. If you don't have savings, if you don't have a cushion, you need credit. Not for luxury, for survival. Your car breaks down, your kid needs new shoes, your rent is due, and your paycheck doesn't land until Friday. So you borrow, and the system knows you need it, which means they can charge you whatever they want. Credit card interest rates for people with low credit scores can hit 25, 28, even 30%. Payday loans go higher. Some predatory lenders charge rates that would make loan sharks blush. If you borrow $500 at 30% interest and it takes you 6 months to pay it back, you're not paying $500. You're paying $600, $650, maybe more, depending on how the compounding works. You borrowed $500, you paid back almost $800. Now, if you have $10,000 sitting in a savings account, you don't need to borrow. Your car breaks down, you pay for it. Out of pocket, no interest, no fees. The problem gets solved and you move on. Same problem, completely different cost. This is the part people don't talk about when they tell you to just save money. They act like saving is a matter of willpower. But willpower doesn't stop your car from breaking down. It doesn't stop emergencies. And if you don't have a cushion, every emergency comes with a tax that people with money never have to pay. Now let's talk about the other side of the equation, the side that actually makes you money. Because once you have $10,000, you're not just avoiding fees, you're starting to earn. Let's say you put that $10,000 into a high-yield savings account. Nothing fancy, just a normal savings account that pays interest. Right now, depending on where you look, you can get somewhere between 4 and 5% annually. That's $400 to $500 per year for doing absolutely nothing. You didn't work for it, you didn't sell anything, you didn't trade your time, you just had money. And the money made more money. Now, if you don't have $10,000, if you're sitting at 800 or 2,000 or even 5, that interest doesn't feel like much. 40 bucks, 80 bucks. It's something, but it's not life-changing. But once you cross 10,000, the math starts to shift because now you're not just saving, you're compounding. And compounding is the single most powerful financial force in existence. Here's how it works. Let's say you have $10,000 in an account earning 5% interest. After 1 year, you have $10,500. Okay, cool. But now, in year 2, you're not earning interest on $10,000. You're earning it on $10,500. So you make $525, then $551, then $551, then $579. You're not adding any new money. The money is just growing on itself, exponentially. After 10 years, that $10,000 becomes $16,289. You did nothing. You added nothing. The system did the work. After 20 years, $26,533. After 30, $43,219. You started with 10. You end with 43. Because time and math were on your side. Now, here's the uncomfortable part. If you don't have that initial 10,000, none of this happens. You can't compound what you don't have. And while you're busy paying overdraft fees and credit card interest and payday loan penalties, people who already crossed the line are watching their money double and double again and again. It's not that they're smarter. It's not that they're more disciplined. It's that they had enough to start. And the system rewards starting. Let's zoom out for a second. This isn't just about individuals. This is a structural feature of capitalism. Wealth doesn't just sit still, it multiplies. And the more you start with, the faster it multiplies. There's a term for this in economics. It's called the Matthew effect, named after a line in the Bible. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. It sounds brutal because it is, but it's also mathematically accurate. People with capital earn returns on that capital. People without capital pay rent to people who have it. This applies to housing, to cars, to education, to credit, to everything. If you own a home, you're building equity. If you rent, you're building someone else's equity. If you own a car, you're avoiding interest payments. If you lease or finance, you're paying interest. If you have savings, emergencies cost you nothing but the cash. If you don't, emergencies cost you cash plus interest plus fees plus stress. The system is designed to extract from the bottom and reward the top, not because anyone sat down and decided to be cruel, but because the incentives are aligned that way. Banks profit from fees, lenders profit from interest, landlords profit from rent, and all of those profits come from people who don't have enough to opt out. Now here's where it gets even stranger. The gap between 0 and 10,000 feels enormous when you're trying to cross it. It feels impossible, like you're running uphill in sand. But the gap between 10,000 and 100,000, that one's easier. Not easy, but easier. Because once you have 10,000, you stop bleeding. You stop paying the poverty tax. You stop losing money to the system just for existing. And that means every dollar you earn after that point actually stays with you. Let's say you're making $50,000 a year. If you're at zero savings, a huge chunk of that 50 is going to fees, interest, overdrafts, emergency debt. You're not actually seeing 50. You're seeing 42, maybe less. But if you're at 10,000 in savings, that same 50,000 is yours. You're not losing it to the system, so your effective income is higher. Even though your paycheck is the same, this is why people say the first 10,000 is the hardest. Because it is. Objectively, mathematically, the system resists you, and once you break through, the resistance drops. But let's be clear about something. Crossing 10,000 doesn't make you rich. It doesn't mean you've won. It just means you've escaped the most punishing part of the game. You're still working. You still need income. You still have bills, but now you have options. And options are the difference between survival and stability. You can take a risk on a new job because you have a cushion if it doesn't work out. You can negotiate your rent because you're not desperate. You can walk away from a bad deal because you're not trapped. You can invest in yourself, in education, in tools, in opportunities because you have the margin to do it. People without savings don't have that margin. Every decision is immediate. Every risk is existential. You can't afford to think long-term because short-term survival is consuming all your bandwidth. This is what people mean when they talk about financial freedom. They're not talking about being rich. They're talking about having enough distance from zero that you can breathe. Now let's talk about what happens after 10,000. Because this is where the system starts working for you in ways that feel almost absurd. At 10,000, you can open a brokerage account. You can start investing in index funds. You can buy stocks, bonds, ETFs, real assets that grow over time. And here's the thing about investing. The returns dwarf savings accounts. Historically, the stock market returns about 10% per year on average. Some years more, some years less. But over time, 10%. So that same $10,000, instead of making $500 a year in a savings account, makes $1,000, then $1,100, then $1,210. After 10 years, it's not $16,000, it's $25,937. After 20 years, $67,275. After 30, $174,494. Same starting point, different vehicle, completely different outcome. But here's the catch. You need $10,000 to start. Most brokerages require a minimum. Some are lower, some are higher. But the principle holds. You need capital to access capital growth. And if you're stuck below that line paying fees and interest and penalties, you're not just missing out on growth, you're actively going backwards. Let's talk about the psychological side of this, because it's not just about money, it's about what money does to your brain. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, your entire cognitive load is consumed by survival. You're thinking about bills, about timing, about what you can delay and what you can't. Your brain is running worst-case scenarios on a loop. What if the car breaks down? What if I get sick? What if I lose my job? This isn't anxiety. This is rational threat assessment. Because for you, those threats are real and constant. And that constant stress has a cost. It makes you worse at everything. Worse at your job. Worse at relationships. Worse at planning. Worse at thinking clearly. Because your brain is using all its resources just to stay afloat. There's research on this. It's called scarcity mindset. When you don't have enough of something, whether it's money or time or food, your brain narrows its focus. You become hyper-focused on the immediate problem, and you lose the ability to think long-term. This is why people in poverty make decisions that look irrational from the outside. It's not because they're stupid. It's because their brains are operating in crisis mode. Every decision is a triage, but once you hit 10,000, that mode starts to relax. Not completely, but enough. You stop living in constant emergency. You start being able to think about next year, about 5 years from now, about building something instead of just surviving. And that shift, that mental shift, is almost as valuable as the money itself. Now, let's address the obvious question. How do you actually get to 10,000 if you're starting from zero? This is where the script could turn into generic advice. Cut your spending, make a budget, get a side hustle. But that's not useful because you already know that. Everyone knows that. The real answer is uncomfortable. For most people, getting to 10,000 requires a combination of extreme discipline, luck, and systemic advantage. You need income. Obvious. But you need income that exceeds your expenses by enough that you can actually save. And for a huge number of people, that gap doesn't exist. Not because they're bad with money, but because rent is too high, because wages are too low, because childcare costs more than they make, because medical debt is crushing them. You can't save what you don't have. And telling people to just save when they're already making every possible sacrifice is not just unhelpful, it's insulting. The people who make it to 10,000 usually have one of three things happen. They get a windfall, a tax refund, a bonus, an inheritance, a gift, something that gives them a lump sum to start with, or they get a significant raise or new job that finally tips their income above their expenses, or they cut their expenses dramatically, move back home, get a roommate, leave the city, something that frees up cash. For most people, it's some combination of all three, plus time, plus luck, plus no disasters along the way. This is why it's hard, not because people are lazy, but because the math has to line up. And for a lot of people, it just doesn't. But let's say you do it. Let's say you scrape and save and sacrifice, and somehow, over months or years, you get to $10,000. What happens next is almost eerie. You stop checking your account every day. You stop panicking when a bill comes in. You stop calculating whether you can afford groceries. The mental noise that used to dominate your life just fades. And suddenly you have bandwidth. You can think about a career move. You can invest in a course. You can take a weekend off without worrying about losing income. You can say no to things that don't serve you. You're still not rich, but you're free, in a way you weren't before. And that freedom compounds too, because now you're making better decisions. You're not desperate, you're not reactive, you're strategic. You're playing a different game. The system that punished you for being poor now starts rewarding you for having money. And every dollar you earn after $10,000 is more valuable than the dollar before it, because it's not going to fees, it's going to growth. Here's the part that bothers people. This system doesn't reward hard work. It rewards capital. You can work 3 jobs and still be broke. You can be disciplined and frugal and smart and still not make it to $10,000. Because hard work doesn't guarantee anything. It never has. What guarantees progress is having enough to start. And if you don't have it, the system makes it nearly impossible to build it. You're running on a treadmill, working just to stay in place. Meanwhile, someone who inherited $50,000 or $100,000 or more doesn't have to work nearly as hard because their money is working for them, compounding, growing, earning returns while they sleep. This isn't a moral judgment. It's just how it is. The game is not fair. It's not designed to be fair. It's designed to preserve and grow existing wealth. And if you're starting from zero, you're not just behind. You're playing against a system that actively resists you. So, what's the point of all this? Why does it matter? Because understanding the system is the first step to navigating it, and maybe, eventually, changing it. If you know that the first 10,000 is the hardest, you stop blaming yourself when it feels impossible. You stop thinking it's a personal failure. You recognize it's structural, and that recognition is powerful. It also means that if you do make it, if you cross that line, you don't take it for granted. You understand how much harder it was than it should have been. And maybe you help someone else cross it too. Because the other uncomfortable truth is that most people who make it to 10,000 forget what it was like before. They start thinking they did it all on their own. They forget the luck, the timing, the advantages, and they start judging people who haven't made it yet. But the math doesn't lie. Getting to 10,000 is hard because the system makes it hard, not because people are weak. Let's zoom out one more time. We live in an economy where wealth is concentrating. The gap between the people who have capital and the people who don't is widening, and that gap starts at $10,000. Think about that. The line between stability and instability, between compounding and bleeding, between options and desperation is $10,000. That's less than a year's rent in most cities, less than a used car, less than a medical emergency, and yet for millions of people, it might as well be $1 million. This is what people talk about when they say the system is broken, not because there's some conspiracy, but because the incentives are misaligned. The structure rewards people who already have money and punishes people who don't. And the gap keeps growing. If you're on the right side of 10,000, life gets easier. Not easy, but easier. Every dollar you save after that point works for you instead of against you. Every decision you make has more room for error. Every opportunity you see becomes reachable. But if you're on the wrong side, you're stuck in a loop. A loop where working harder doesn't necessarily get you out. Because the system is taking from you faster than you can build. So where does that leave us? Here's the thing. This script isn't about telling you to save $10,000. You already know you should. Everyone knows they should. This is about understanding why it matters and why it's so hard. And why, once you get there, the rules change. The first 10,000 isn't just money. It's a threshold. a line between two different financial realities. On one side, the system is your enemy. On the other side, it's your ally. And the cruel part is that the people who need the system to be an ally are the ones it fights the hardest. But here's the hope. If you know the rules, you can play the game better. You can recognize the traps. You can avoid the fees. You can make decisions that move you toward that line instead of away from it. It's not easy. It's not fair, but it's possible, and once you cross it, once you hit that 10,000, everything you've heard is true. Life does get easier, not because you're suddenly rich, but because you've escaped the part of the system designed to keep you poor, and that's worth fighting for. So here's the question to leave you with. If $10,000 is the line between two completely different financial realities, why is that line so invisible? Why don't we teach this in schools? Why don't we talk about the poverty tax? Why don't we explain compounding and capital and the Matthew effect to people before they enter the system? Is it because we don't know? Or is it because the system works better when people don't realize how it's structured? Think about it.